Welcome back. I'm Peter St. Onge. This is a weekly roundup of my daily videos on the economy and freedom, where I cut through the BS and lay out what the gaslighting clowns pulled out of their hats this week and what is coming next. The federal government just turned in its worst October budget deficit in history. Even worse than the COVID spending orgy, nothing stops this train. This is great if you own gold or Bitcoin. It is not so great if you or your kids pay taxes. The numbers come from Treasury, who announced they collected $404 billion in taxes last month, up nearly a quarter on the year, yet they spent $689 billion, as in they borrowed almost as much as they collected in taxes. That brought the deficit to $284 billion in a single month. Now, for perspective, that's twice the annual budget in George W.'s last year in a single month, and we thought W was bad. Keep in mind, this is with tariffs, which brought in roughly $30 billion on the month, a drop in the bucket against 284. The problem, of course, is Congress, who took 24% more of your blood, sweat, and tears, yet somehow managed to spend even more. For perspective, if our small government Republican Congress had simply held the line on federal spending, a reasonable ask after 50 years of promises to slash federal spending, the deficit would have shrunk by a third. Instead, we're now approaching $300 billion in a single month. Now, almost half of spending was Social Security and Medicare. A fifth was defense, which is probably 5 times more than we need for border security and blowing up drug boats. Another $150 billion, so 22 cents on the dollar, was welfare, from SNAP to Medicaid to cash payments and Section 8. This is all important because it makes poor people and illegals vote Democrat. Then the big one, debt interest. This soared to $91 billion on the month, over $1 trillion annualized, every last penny borrowed. In fact, last month, a quarter of every dollar you paid in tax went straight out the back door as interest payments to China and Wall Street. So what's next? A year ago, we had the perfect storm to cut federal spending. Small government Republicans finally had unified control of White House and Congress. Elon was eyeing trillions in cuts, and we had a president who was gloriously hostile to the federal government that, in theory, he controls. Yet, here we are with a record deficit despite paying 24% more tax. In short, it cannot be fixed with conventional means. Now, Congress could pass a budget rule with teeth, maybe a balanced budget amendment, or Warren Buffett's idea that if Congress can't balance the budget, they all have to resign with lifetime ban from politics. Of course, it won't happen, partly because the GOP talks a big game then spends, and partly because the filibuster requires both parties to agree when Democrats certainly won't cut spending. This means we are careening to fiscal disaster with coming periodic crises in treasury markets, each doused with fresh trillions from the Fed that will convert to ongoing permanent inflation, or even default when some enterprising politician realizes voters love the idea of stiffing China and Wall Street. Countries around the world are entering the fiat endgame, from Japan's constant yen crashes to Britain's ongoing game of chicken with bond markets. Note, both countries' deficits are half ours in GDP terms. Even with the dollar as the world's reserve currency, running $2 trillion deficits forever means it is only a matter of time till it breaks, and heaven help us when we get a recession and it goes to $3 trillion. The FBI just released numbers showing crime is rising in blue cities, putting the lie to media's narrative that violent crime is all in Donald Trump's head. What was most striking is the concentration of crime. So studies in Philly, New York, and Chicago suggest roughly 1% of offenders commit more than 60% of violent crime. The solution is very easy on paper: lock them up and throw away the key. El Salvador, for example, flooded the zone with police and prisons and cut violent crime by 90% in 3 years. This should be very easy in America, which is 10 times richer than El Salvador. The problem, of course, is the left made it nearly impossible to put bad guys away. Criminal rights in the 1970s crashed the conviction rate by inventing criminal rights, including litigation, that crippled confessions and, incidentally, deportations with made-up due process. Meanwhile, left-wing judges directed billions of your tax dollars into paying public defenders $200,000 a year and outside lawyers $220 an hour to keep repeat offenders on the street. Some jurisdictions tried to end-run these using three strikes laws that put you away for 3 felonies, most famously California. The problem is it applied to any felony, meaning guys ended up getting life for shoplifting, which media hyped to erode public support to where left-wing prosecutors ignore it. So the easiest fix is 3 strikes for violent felons at state and county level. We actually have this at the federal level, but it only applies to the tiny number of federal violent crimes like kidnapping, RICO, and terrorism. Even better is the root of the problem, those 1970s criminal rights. While we're at it, making prisons very unpleasant. We have a perfect model for this in Japan, where crime exploded after World War II as police budgets were starved for reconstruction. This is the golden age of Yakuza and delinquent motorcycle gangs with baseball bats. To give a sense, youth robbery in 1940s Japan soared 800%, and the homicide rate was 50 times higher than today. In fact, it was higher than many U.S. states today. Walk around old parts of Tokyo and you'll see broken glass embedded on top of walls, waregarasu, as mementos. To end the crime spree, Japan plowed resources into putting police everywhere, the famous police boxes outside every train station. They increased sentences and ramped up prosecution and conviction rates with manpower, prosecution review commissions to harass prosecutors who let crime slide, even a right for private citizens to challenge a prosecutor's decision not to prosecute. Forensics are among the best funded in the world. Pretrial detention is up to 23 days, so no cash bail, no any bail. And police have wide leeway to pressure confessions, resulting in 90% of crimes ending in confessions like it used to be in the U.S. The other magic part of Japan's solution is prisons. They are basically run like POW camps. You sleep a specific way, eat a specific way, walk a specific way, you don't speak unless spoken to, and you get long solitary for any disobedience. Interestingly, the strict routine means prisoners have full access to machine shops, knives, saws, hammers, so they can learn trades once they leave prison. So as next, for all the trillions government spends, there is plenty of money to fix crime. The biggest hurdle is those pro-criminal laws that, given the filibuster, would need Democrats to actually turn on criminals. The left destroyed our criminal justice system. Reversing the rot can happen very fast. Japan did it in a decade, El Salvador in 3 years. But crime will only end if Democrats want it to end. A word from our sponsor. If you own gold, and many of you do, you already understand how it protects your wealth from the insanity coming out of Washington. The inflation, the recessions, the wars. But with monetary metals, there's a way to actually earn a yield of up to 4% on your gold paid in more ounces of gold. You retain ownership of real, allocated physical gold with no storage costs while your ounces grow every month outside the banking system. If you're serious about protecting your future and building your legacy, head to monetarymetals.com/Peter to get started. Now back to our show. The median age of an American homebuyer just hit a record 59 years old, up from 39 in 2010. In fact, the average first-time homebuyer is now 40 years old, which is a bit long in the tooth to be starting a family. Will a house become something you buy at retirement like a gold watch? After years of nosebleed home prices thanks to Federal Reserve money printing, home prices are finally leveling off, while price metrics slide into crisis territory. In a recent video, I mentioned how there's currently 500,000 more homes for sale than buyers. Just last week, Zillow announced the average home listing hit record discounts of up to $25,000. A near record 70% of all home listings have been on the market 60 days plus, basically meaning it's inactive. And delistings, where the seller gives up and takes the home off the market, are up 30% on the year, hitting the highest since 2017, which makes sense given there's 500,000 extra homes for sale. Now, taken together, this suggests house prices should finally start coming down, yet they are not, with the Case-Shiller House Price Index continuing to rise, up 1.5% this year. So the main driver of home prices are inflation and mortgage rates. Housing traditionally tracks inflation 1-to-1, while cheap mortgages make house prices go up to the tune of roughly 10% in house price for every 1% cut in mortgage rates. That's why housing got so expensive under Biden, yet double-digit inflation on top of COVID-era interest rates that delivered record-low 3% mortgages. The weird part was when the Fed finally did hike rates starting in 22, it nearly tripled mortgage rates, but house prices continued going up. The go-to explanation was people were stuck in their 3% mortgages they couldn't afford to sell and get a new mortgage at triple the rate. The problem is mortgage rates are now historically normal, about 6.25%, but prices are still rising even with the buyer shortage, delistings, and stale listings. So what's going on? Two things. Sellers with inflated expectations after 25 years of rising home prices and winning the lotto in COVID, and buyers who do not have money or credit. So car loan defaults are up 50% on the year. Credit card defaults are up to 1 in 7 cardholders. 40 million Americans are now repaying Biden's paused student loans with an average balance of almost $40,000. Toss in wages that still haven't made back Biden losses, and buyers simply do not have the money or the credit for a $400,000 house that used to cost $300,000, while sellers don't want to accept that it's a $300,000 house. So what's next? Housing will not unstick until mortgages get under the fives, which might happen in the next year, going by the Fed's easy money whispers. At that point, we'll see who's swimming without a suit, if that 500,000 missing buyers finally hit house prices, or if cheap mortgages do what they always do, push prices even higher. The clean solution is raise incomes for the young so they can grow into $400,000 houses. If Trump gets this investment boom, that will happen, although it will take years. In the meantime, buying a first house in your 40s is here to stay. Canada is barreling toward serfdom as a new study finds government workers increased 950,000 since 2015. In U.S. population terms, that's 9 million additional government workers in just 9 years. Meanwhile, a universal basic income threatens to bankrupt the country while turning Canada's open borders into a global free-for-all. Now, 950 brings total government workers in Canada to almost 1 in 4. So in U.S. terms, that's 40 million government workers, slightly fewer than the Soviet Union. So if you are Canadian and not working for the government, congratulations, there are not many of you left. Now, that is a problem because, of course, government workers produce nothing. They are pure parasites on the back of the workers who pay their salary. And it means a Canadian family working 2 jobs will soon be paying the entire salary of a bureaucrat on top of the pensioner they already support, plus hordes of open border migrants who never paid into Canada's welfare state but are very happy to cash out. It's a lot of straws on a camel who is already putting groceries on the credit card. And it puts context on a leaked report last year by the RCMP, Canada's FBI, warning of a, quote, groundswell of discontent as Canadian living standards decline. In case you're curious, what happens when a government has given up? It buys more guns. The fun does not stop there. In May, a Liberal senator introduced a bill to push a universal basic income, an unconditional monthly cash payment to, quote, all persons over the age of 17. So open borders and free monthly cash, what could possibly go wrong? Note that since the 90s, Canada's foreign-born population doubled to nearly 1 in 4. It's actually 1 in 3 under age 14, as in future Canadian voters. The last 3 years alone, Canada took in nearly 3 million migrants. In U.S. terms, that's 27 million migrants. And roughly 90% of Canadian population growth is now migrants. Toss on a UBI, and in a generation, regular Canadians will be a rounding error. Now, all this matters because Canada is, in theory, a democracy, and both government workers and migrants vote overwhelmingly left. So if a quarter of voters work for government and another third are foreign-born, Canada is approaching the point where it becomes statistically impossible for a small government conservative to ever win an election. So as next, regular Canadians are already struggling with jobs and affordability that's taken incomes to West Virginia level, homes to San Francisco level, and now a trade war that threatens to turn entire swaths of the country into Rust Belt. Unemployment is nearly 50% higher than the U.S. The country's on the edge of a technical recession. Household debt is almost twice the rate in the U.S., yet the government acts like they just struck an oil well, hiring millions of bureaucrats and even more millions of imported welfare cases, because it knows both will turn into perfect liberal voters. Populist anger is growing in Canada, discontent to the RCMP. The question is, does it grow fast enough to cancel millions of new liberal voters and perhaps tens of millions with that UBI? A word from our sponsor. One of the best ways to secure your Bitcoin is with a hardware wallet, a physical device that lets you keep your coins offline without internet connection. One of the most trusted names in hardware wallets is CoinKite, maker of the famous block clock. CoinKite devices are made in Canada and they're run by passionate Bitcoiners who've been at this since 2012, back when Bitcoiners were trading in person at swap meets. You can pick up hardware wallets and plenty of other goodies at coinkite.com/ProfSaintAnge. That's CoinKite.com/ProfSaintAnge. Okay, back to our show. A new MIT study says AI can already replace 1 in 8 work hours and growing fast. Is it the end of work, and not in a good way? The study is based on their so-called iceberg index that maps out 32,000 skills across 923 occupations and match it to AI capabilities. Helpfully, they break jobs into minutes, not lump sum, to reflect what percent of a given job can be automated. Using this, they figure that while we're seeing about 2% of jobs currently affected by AI and monthly job losses, 6 times that, so almost 12% of job minutes, can be replaced by AI today. That represents roughly $1.2 trillion in wages. The worst hit are IT, finance, healthcare administration, which is a shockingly big employer, and professional services, so think accounting, HR, call centers, and data entry. These collectively make up nearly 1 in 4 jobs in the U.S. and almost half of white-collar jobs. Now, to say 12% of minutes can be replaced does not mean they will be replaced, at least not today, because the company has to restructure workflows and skills to integrate the AI, while the hallucination problem in AI means it's still not ready for prime time when real money or real reputation is at stake. Still, the writing is on the wall, and it's most likely to hit the young. Because finding workers is very hard, the rule of thumb in business is it costs 6 months' salary to recruit, onboard, and train a new worker, meaning most companies won't fire people, they just won't hire new people. Which is a problem if you just graduated college with no experience and a degree in psychology. So just last month, Amazon said they're slashing new hires by 600,000, instead making do with the people they've already got and allowing gradual attrition to shrink the workforce. That new worker effect is already hitting. A recent Stanford report looked at the most exposed AI jobs, including clerical back office, administrative support, call centers, and middle-skill tech. It found that experienced workers are not being cut, but new hires are being hit with a 13% decline in employment, which is recession-level hiring. So as next, AI is advancing much faster than expected. Measured by business applications by training, compute, or context length, capabilities are growing 10 times per year. Both hallucination and costs, pennies per token, are improving by double per year, as in half the hallucination, half the cost every year, while human workers are not budging, not least because of our dysfunctional education system. So current workers with experience still have a runway, since it will take a couple years for companies to redesign around AI. But for young workers, it's about to hit the fan, a fan that blows their $150,000 psych degrees like confetti. So if you're young or if you have kids, consider jobs that are least vulnerable to AI. So skilled trades, construction and maintenance, medicine, nursing, physical therapy, or services from childcare counselors and content creators to chefs, designers, and yes, bartenders. When the smoke clears, experienced workers still have a couple years. Young workers who pivot will be fine. The ones in the middle, in their expensive degrees, will get crushed. Thanks for tuning in. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss an episode, and go to petersaintange.com for daily videos and in-depth articles with charts and all the gory details. Okay, we'll be watching. See you next time.